Hello everyone, welcome to our audiobook channel. If you enjoy this story or want to hear more exciting content, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Your feedback helps us improve and bring even more captivating stories. Yes, we invite you to listen to part 1 of the series. Enjoy listening. Chapter 1. Frozen for 300 years. Rainy season. In an instant, gloomy black clouds enveloped the sunny sky. The slum dwellers doing their daily activities immediately went back to their houses in fear as rain started pouring down heavily. Rainwater began to accumulate and spread rapidly in the streets of the slums, immersing the poor houses to their limit. The drainage system that had been unrepaired for ages was not doing its job as the entire outer wall of the slums became a vast expanse of rainwater. In the Maishan orphanage. Near the door, a woman in her 30s led a dozen children ranging from 7 to 11 years old to carry sandbags that had been prepared, stacking them on top of the threshold in hope of blocking the raging floods. "Dean, come over to help. It's useless to call him, he's a fool." "Really?" A few sweating boys, exhausted from holding sandbags, saw a little boy standing quietly not far from the window. Even though they were angry, they knew it was useless. They could only bite their tongues and continue handing sandbags to be sent to the door. The little boy looked 7 or 8 years old. His thin but tall frame made him look more similar to an 11-year-old. The most conspicuous detail was his color. He was very white, maybe even a bit morbidly pale. His skin color caused the other children to envy him, as everyone else was dark due to exposure to the bright sunlight. Dudien sighed in his heart. Although he had left the cold storage for more than 3 months, his body had yet to recover enough to lift anything. It was exceedingly difficult for him to stand, let alone carry sandbags to block the rain. However, such a situation could be regarded as fortunate. After all, the Institute had just made the very first freezer when the disaster spread to China. As there was nowhere enough time for an experimental change, nobody knew about this type of failure. It was already a miracle that he was able to sleep in the freezer for 300 years. Nevertheless, he did not feel happy. He survived, but his parents and sister stayed down and had to face the terrible disaster. Even if they had been miraculously lucky and survived, they would have long been buried in the dust after 300 years. In this vast, new world, he no longer had loved ones. He would have to face this new world alone. Although he grieved, he did not despair because he knew his parents had given him a second chance at life. He would not allow himself to go down easily. He would not just live well and get by, but also do what it takes to make his deceased family proud. Fortunately, God finally sheltered the human race. When Dudien had just climbed out from cold storage, the first thought that came to mind was that he was the only person alive on the earth. Only when he walked out of the garbage dump of the cold storage warehouse did he find that humans were not yet extinct. Only a few people seemed to have survived the disaster, but the human population had grown to a decent size after 300 years of development. Unfortunately, technology and civilization had long been destroyed by the disaster. Dudien could not find a trace of any symbol of the old era of science and technology. The loss of knowledge about the electric power added difficulties to basic life. The storm outside the window gradually came to a stop as Dudien was lost in his thoughts. All the people in the house felt relief as they watched the water level behind the sandbags dropping. Exhaustion seeped into them as if they had just experienced an everlasting battle. The middle-aged woman raised her head to observe the dark clouds gradually scatter to reveal a sunny sky and said, "Get ready to go to the cafeteria for dinner." The children's eyes lit up as soon as they heard the word eat. Their previous fatigue was instantly swept away as they scurried back to the room, put on their waxgrass shoes, and lined up in an orderly manner. "Dean, get ready to eat." At this time, a voice called out to Dudien. The voice came to him from a 7-year-old boy. He patted Dudien's shoulder and pointed in the direction of the canteen. Dudien remembered this boy named Barton. Barton was one of the few children in the orphanage that was well-intentioned. As the language had changed in the past 300 years, Dudien did not understand it and stood silent from the time that he entered the orphanage, causing everyone to think that he was retarded or had brain problems. So naturally, he was placed into the group of the deformed children with Barton. The children at the orphanage were generally divided into 2 factions. The first were those abandoned by their parents. The second were those who were abandoned by their parents due to physical deformities. Dudien nodded and followed Barton to the lines by the column. Just as Barton was about to tell Dudien to first put on the grass sandals, he inadvertently looked down. Seeing that Dudien had long been wearing a light green pair of sandals, he could not help but feel stupid. Plastic had yet to be invented in this world. Wax grass shoes and clothes became the most common form of rain gear. This natural variation of grass that could be found everywhere had a fine convex layer of wax that effectively blocked radiation rain and thus became an essential household item. Everyone carefully walked alongside the threshold before the narrow half-meter-high stone-paved trail. Although the rainwater only came up to their ankles, even the strongest of them would inevitably become seriously ill if they fell into the water. Because of the limited seating available, the best seats in the cafeteria were immediately seized by those healthy children. Dudien, Barton, and the rest of the deformed kids had long ago become accustomed to their tables in the back corner made from several stacked stoner. I heard that a doctor and construction worker have come this time for the adoptions. Aunt Di said to seize this opportunity and put on a good performance. It would be awesome if you could be adopted by a doctor. I would rather be adopted by the construction worker. There might be a chance to climb the giant wall of Sylvia and see the outside world. Barton and several other children whispered and chatted. None of these children looked normal. Some were missing an ear while others had scarring on half of their faces. Dudien's eyes flashed as he heard their words, but he kept silent. Unfortunately, Dean's brain is no good. Otherwise he would definitely be selected by those people with that kind of appearance and body. Barton sighed suddenly as he looked at Dudien with regret in his eyes. The other children looked at the unresponsive Dudien, all shaking their head. Other children also looked at the unresponsive Dudien but just shook their heads. Long ago they agreed that no matter who got adopted, they would do their best to come back and help the rest of the children. On the surface, Dudien was no double the most promising candidate to be adopted, but his chances were very low with that type of brain problem. His situation was even worse than the deformed kids, such as the one with a face full of lumps. Although they might look scary, they were at least physically and mentally able enough to find a job in the future. At this time, Lunghang, a thin child seated close by, heard Barton's words and contemptuously said, "They are a bunch of mutilated things, yet they still want the opportunity to be adopted." His words immediately attracted the attention of others. Disdain and disgust filled their eyes as they fell on Dudien, Barton, and the others. Relative to the deformed children, they are physically sound but abandoned people. Dudien did not say anything as he quietly glanced at these people. Although he is still a child, his heart was much harder than most adults. Mo Yang's eyes gazed at Dudien. Look at this fool. He won't understand even if you call him. No wonder he was abandoned. A fool. You wanted to be adopted. Why don't you just obediently wait until you turn 13 years old and they throw you into the mine as manual labor? These children did not attempt to hide their contempt and disgust. Instead, it was a form of pleasure for them. As the food was given out, the middle-aged woman lightly shouted, "Quiet down. Do you not want to eat?" Hearing this, the arrogance on their faces quickly took on looks of innocence as if nothing happened. The next day, silver-gray clouds gradually stretched out to let the sun spill down onto the slums. In the rainy season, this type of good weather was rare. Today was also the long-awaited big day for the children of Maishan Orphanage, Adoption Day. All of the families booked in advance for the chance to come to the orphanage on this day and pick a child. Although it was early in the morning, Dudien still got up on time. This world may no longer have alarm clocks, but his biological clock had never been wrong. After getting up, he quickly cleaned up his bedding and washed his face with simple filtered well water. As he picked up his clothes by the pillow to get dressed, he suddenly found a purple handkerchief within the cloth. Dudien was startled and could not help but think of that cold night when he was led to the orphanage by a little girl. Unfortunately, the sky was too dark to see each other's appearances. In the past 3 months, he learned that only those in the upper reach of the outer wall were able to afford this type of fine cloth. The handkerchief was left to wipe the dirt off his face. Dudien put the handkerchief away and left for the open space outside the orphanage. Although the only parents in his mind were his biological ones, he wanted to get adopted as soon as possible. If he reached the age of 13 without getting adopted, the orphanage would give up on taking care of him and send him to the Maishan Chamber of Commerce to be used as permanent free labor. Maishan Chamber of Commerce is the controlling body of the mine. As free labor, he would be forced to work until he died of exhaustion or old age. He would never again have the opportunity to see the light of day. On the same day, all the children of the orphanage washed themselves, dressed in their nicest clothes, and were neatly put in a line. Nobody would bear to be near you if you were covered in a bad odor. This is what the aunt controlling the orphanage told them. As all the children stood in line, the adults walked up and observed the children who they might potentially adopt as their own under the care of Diana and the other orphanage workers. Under the guidance of Aunt Diana, the children and workers knew not to speak of the deformities. Wu Yuliu's eyes were full of innocence, desire, and hope as they welcomed the grown-ups. Her eyes were so teary that some of the adults could not help but feel sad or bear to not choose her. Soon, the thin and tall Dudian became the focus of all the adults' attention. His skin, as pale as snow, was too eye-catching. His temperament differed vastly from the surrounding children. This child had a very calm and extravagant aura surrounding him. The adults were surprised as they did not expect an orphanage in the slums to have such a good seedling. For a time, many of their hearts were wavering. Chapter 2. Manner. The other children were sensitive to this change. An 8 or 9-year-old petite little girl immediately said, "He is Dean. His brain is always in a daze and he cannot speak. Please do not take offense." She was young, but the brutal living environment forced her to quickly mature into a clever and crafty individual. She did not show a hint of jealousy, only pointing out Dudian's defect as if helping. In a sense, it was the smartest move for her. Yeah. Uncle and aunts, he really can't talk." The other children quickly echoed her response. Barton and the several deformed children living with Dudian were shocked upon hearing the little girl's words. No one expected her to say such a thing. An ugly look flashed across Barton's face upon hearing the other normal children point out Dudian's defect. Nonetheless, he would not dare speak up for Dudian for fear of leaving a bad impression on the aunts and uncles. Dudian also glanced at the little girl. He was slightly surprised in his heart. She left a very positive impression on him during his past 3 months in the orphanage. She was one of the few in the normal children faction that seemed to possess a good character and a kind heart. Out of all of them, this girl in particular was very gentle. Even Barton and the other deformed children showered her with mouthfuls of praise in private. Because Dudian originally had a good impression of her, he remembered that her name seemed to be Lisa. Sure enough, he understood that he was still too naive. At this time, as if enlightened by Lisa's words, the eyes of the adults revealed a trace of understanding. With such a figure and skin so clean and delicate, who could bear to abandon such a child? Many of them looked at Durian with pity. Lisa and the rest of the children were relieved upon seeing the adults' reactions. Aunts and uncles. Without any warning, a tender voice sounded from the crowd. The voice caused both the children and the grown-ups to be surprised. Suddenly, all the children's mouths gaped as if they had just seen a ghost. Those words were spoken by Dudian. These 3 months in the orphanage, Dudian stayed silent every day in order to listen and observe, learning simple words and pronunciations. Pronunciation and language class was mandatory even in this old and rusty orphanage due to the many children who were not even 1 year old. Although he did not join in their conversations, he learned much by eavesdropping. The people around him assumed he was just dumb. They would even attempt to communicate with him using hand signals and gestures. Nobody took the initiative to find him for a chat, so he simply did not bother to speak to anyone, happily silent. "I do not have any problems," Durian said quietly in an immature voice. He did not directly accuse Lisa of lying in order to get revenge. There was no need to be so superfluous. The adults who were a little surprised seemed to understand something as they pointed wistful gazes to Lisa. Unexpectedly, they found similarly surprised looks on the faces of the children and staff. For a time, many of the adults frowned. One of the sturdy, middle-aged men said, "Look at their faces. It seems none of them knew you could speak. Can you tell me why you would want to hide that?" One of the taboos of adoption was a lack of sense of security with a child. Nobody would want to adopt a child whose mind was filled with crafty thoughts and unwilling cleverness. Dudian knew that he finally had the attention of these people and calmly said, "I did not deliberately hide anything, but my character is naturally introverted. I did not speak, so they labeled me as dumb." Hearing his words, the coldness in their eyes gradually melted. They understood that most orphans in such circumstances would develop an introverted personality. Even if you are introverted, your voice is not quiet. Nobody ever heard you say a word. A woman in the crowd questioned with a suspicious look on her face. Aunt Di interrupted without giving Dudien a chance to respond. In this child's case, he loves to clean. We specifically assigned him to a separate room. There was no chance for him to communicate with the other children. Hearing these words, Barton and the other children were all slightly confused. They could not figure out why Aunt Di would lie. There was no orphanage where a child enjoyed a room to himself. Dudien immediately understood. In this point, today's orphanages and the orphanages of his past were similar. They would cover up the flaws of the children as much as possible in order to increase their chances of being adopted. If these adults knew that Dudien was admitted only 3 months ago, no one would be willing to adopt him even if he was in perfect condition. Every 7-year-old child would have memories and would certainly remember their biological parents. Nobody could guarantee that he would not leave to find his real parents once he became an adult. Understanding things to this point, Dudien's mind slightly sank as he noticed Lisa and the other children of the normal faction seemingly ready to speak out at any time. Aunt Di also noticed this and severely glared at Lisa and the few children that were ready to speak, terrifying them into silence. In this orphanage, Aunt Di controlled their life and death. As long as she got involved, their chances of being adopted could turn to 0. Dudien knew he had no special charisma. The reason Aunt Di helped him was so that he would be adopted and be one less expense for the orphanage. So that's the way it is, the fat woman looked at Dudien's pale, snow-white skin with a sympathetic and puzzled face. Son, I will pick you up and you will be my child. At her words, Barton and several other children were pleasantly surprised. They looked so happy as if it was them that were getting adopted. As Dudien heard this, he looked at the fat woman's face and hands. He noticed her rough fingers and could not help but frown slightly. Just as he was about to refuse, another person suddenly laughed. I find this child quite pleasing to the eye. I think, with my status, I would be more suitable to be this child's parent. Everyone looked at this mediocre middle-aged man and the faint smile on his face. The fat-faced woman frowned and spoke in a cold voice. I'd like to hear who you are, big man. The middle-aged man smiled faintly and said, I am just a small family gardener for the Mel family. The children did not show much of a reaction, but the surrounding people could not help but change color as they whispered. Mel family? Is it that Mel family? Aside from the Mel family, which other Mel needs a gardener? For a time, all eyes were focused on the middle-aged man with a tinge of awe. The fat woman immediately paled, bowing her head in silence. How about it, boy? The middle-aged man was very satisfied with the response and smiled at Dudien as he asked. With this, Lisa and the other children started to pick up on the clues. One by one, intense gazes of jealousy and envy were directed at Dudien. To be adopted with such good conditions, how could they not be jealous? Dudien frowned slightly. After thinking a little, he shook his head and responded. I am sorry, uncle. Thank you for considering me, but I hope that my parents could be doctors so that there is sense of security. He was refused. The middle-aged man was immediately stunned. He did not think Dudien would refuse. He visited a lot of orphanages looking for children. Those children would become excited as soon as it was mentioned that they were being adopted by the Mel family gardener. None were able to stay as calm as Dudien or speak in such an orderly manner. Soon, the man woke up from his trance. Dudien, of course, also picked up on the clues and was able to discern the status of this gardener from the expression of the other adults. He knew that the Mel family must be an influential force. Dudien, on the other hand, did not want to be stuck in a manor. Chapter 3. The New Beginning. Doctor. Suddenly, a young woman dressed in a gray gown asked Dudien, Child, I am a doctor. Are you willing to be my son? Dudien noted this woman in his mind once he heard her take the initiative to speak. Originally, he held an adventurous attitude by refusing the gardener. The other were afraid of offending the gardener of the Mel family, so they did not dare to choose Dudien. This doctor's identity seemed to hold some weight. What Dudien did not know was how rare doctors were in this world. Although it was still a civilian occupation, it was an exceedingly rare one. In a manner of speaking, it could be classified as a senior occupation. With the Mel family's gardener present, those with basic civilian occupations would not dare to choose this child, but compared to a doctor, a mere gardener was only at the level of ordinary civilian jobs such as miners and tailors. Dudienne had a good impression of this young woman. Her cheeks were framed by soft lines. Shallow dimples appeared on her face as she vividly smiled. The way she looked at Dudienne was as if a mother was looking at her son. His cold heart began melting under her gentle gaze as he nodded. "I am willing." The middle-aged gardener's face turned unsightly, but as he looked at the young woman, he held back and did not say a thing. He secretly felt sorry for Dudienne. After all, Dudienne was very young and short-sighted. Doctors are good, but not every child of a doctor had the ability to learn their parents' trade. The occupation itself had a very difficult entry barrier and required a lot of energy and dedication. If Dudienne could not succeed, he would be left as a low-level nobody. Gardening, on the other hand, was different. You would be able to start as long as you had a good memory. As a gardener for the Mel family, Dudienne would be living far away from the slums. In the future, he would be able to inherit the gardener's place. Working for the Mel family and staying at their home is the dream of many commoners. Ah, how unfortunate, how unfortunate. The middle-aged gardener shook his head. The normal children's expressions turned ugly as they saw the doctor choose Dudienne. Barton and the other deformed kids were much better, albeit a little jealous. Nonetheless, Dudienne stole a valuable opportunity, causing the rest of the children to hold resentment and envy in their hearts. Dudienne held an auspicious smile on his face. He was one of the few in the orphanage that caught the doctor's eyes. Moreover, his calm attitude and the look of his clean white skin made people feel more comfortable around him. Aunt Di turned to the young doctor and said, "Dudienne has always been very well behaved here. We hope that you take good care of him and wish the two of you lead a happy life." "I will," said the young woman as she smiled. "It fills my heart with joy." Aunt Di instructed the woman next to her. "Mina, take them to apply for the household registration procedures." The woman called Mina waved at Dudienne and the young woman with a laugh. "Come with me please." "Go on, Dean. Dean, do not forget us. Remember to come back and see us." Barton and the rest of the deformed children cried out reluctantly. "I will be back, but do not be discouraged," said Dudienne as he remembered how he was taken care of by then for 3 months. "Maybe you will all be adopted by the time I return." Although they knew in their hearts what the results would be, they still laughed. As he was getting ready to leave, Dudienne suddenly heard the middle-aged gardener's voice. "I will choose you." Dudienne could not help but look, only to see him pointing at Lisa. He smiled and spoke. "Little girl, you have quite the clever mind. How about being my daughter?" Lisa stared at him with a look of disbelief painted on her face. She looked around at the other healthy children around her. After a glance, Dudienne withdrew his gaze from Lisa and faced Aunt Mina. He left with Mina and his soon-to-be mother shortly after. He and the other children of the orphanage will soon live in their own respective homes. Perhaps they would never meet again. The household registration procedures for the orphanage were very simple. First, verify the identity of the adopting parent. Second, verify the occupation of the adopter to prove their capability to support the child. The purpose of these verifications was to determine whether the adoptive parent met the requirements set by the law. If you did not work or if your wages were too low, you would not meet the specifications for adoption. Third, a contract would have to be signed to confirm the adoptive relationship. Finally, and of course most importantly, the money had to exchange hands. In this world, adoptions were an orphanage's main source of income. In the past, the registration procedures would be finished with the signing of the contract. No money was involved. But in this new day and age, it was different. Adoption was the same as selling a product. The only difference being that it was now legal for orphanages to sell children. Dudienne had never seen the new world's money. As his mother took out a thick stack of green notes, the only noticeable difference he could discern was the picture of the giant wall of Sylvia printed above. It seems as if the city of Sylvia was covered by this giant wall. As Dudienne watched his mother handing the stack of bills to Aunt Mina, things became clear. Why else would children be accepted into the orphanage so easily? The orphanage selflessly provided food and shelter for the children, knowing that they would be adopted in a few months and bring in a large sum of money. Dudian sighed. He felt as if he finally understood the difference between the new era and the old one, survival of the fittest. Either adapt to this world or be crushed under it. Once the payment procedure and signing of the contract was finalized and put away, the young doctor bent over to caress Dudian's hair. As he looked at her pale brown eyes, he knew that this woman would be the only person he would be able to rely on in the future. He was silent for a moment before speaking. "May I call you Aunt Ju?" Jura was slightly confused. Mina spoke as she heard Dudian's words. "Do not bend the rules. She is your mother now and you must be good to her. Do not disappoint the reputation of our orphanage." Jura smiled as she stroked Durian's hair in a gentle manner. "You can call me Aunt Ju until you are able to get used to it." A trance of warmth flowed to Dudian's face as he softly said, "Thank you." He was grateful for her gentle temperament because he knew that once adopted, his life and death would be entirely up to his adopted parents. He had already heard from the other children that in this world it would be legal even if the parents decided to kill their child. Jura smiled. "Let's go back and take you to your new home." Jura's home in the neighborhood. All of the inhabitants of this neighborhood had ordinary jobs, but the environment here was totally different from the slums he was used to. The air was much fresher and he could no longer sense the rotten odor of the slums. Even in this huge residential area, Jura's living conditions belonged to the more upscale lifestyle. The price of land here was twice as high as the slums due to its distance from the slums in the north and closeness to the commercial area in the south. Anyone living in the commercial or military area was one with either a large amount of wealth or influence. The cost of housing in these areas amounted to an astronomical figure that most people could not earn in a lifetime. Each area had a high wall barrier. The gates that divided Silva only opened once a day. The gates of the residential area in the south did not face the gates of the slums in the north. This meant that people in the residential area were free to go to the slums, business people were free to go to the residential area, but residents of the slums could not. The status of the dwellers of the slums was nowhere near enough for them to access the upper scale areas. Chapter 4. The Dark Night. Jura pulled out a ring of keys and unlocked the door. Dudian started taking note of the room, knowing that this is where he would be living here for some time in the future. "Dean, come in," said Jura from behind a small closet door. She appeared suddenly swinging a pair of adult cotton shoes in her hands as if to tease him. Dudian was startled, but also relieved. This was another one of the conditions for adoption, marriage. "Come, I'll bring you over to wash up," Jura warmly said. Dudian expected to be able to soak in a bath, but we quickly disappointed. The result was Jura soaking a towel in warm water and using it to help wipe his face and arms. This way of bathing was exactly the same in the orphanage. Nonetheless, the color of this water was much purer. What Dudian did not know was that even the nobility of the world used this dry cleaning method for bathing. People generally believed that the water would weaken their bodies and harm their immune system. Even members of the aristocracy that were plagued by hypochondria would only bathe once or twice a year. After washing, Dudian was given new clothes to replace his rags as Jura made him more familiar with his new home. Things were as expected as Dudian looked around the house. There were no scientific or technological items found, not even a simple alarm clock. The only trace of the former era he could find was a fairy tale only seen in the books. The story itself seemed to originate from the European medieval period where not even the steam engine was created yet. As he thought of all he had seen these past 3 months, Dudian became more and more convinced in his heart that this post-disaster world civilization should have just developed into the Bronze Age. They barely knew how to use metal. This discovery caused some ideas to emerge within his mind. The evening sky once again darkened, the chilling air seeming as if it was inviting the rain to come again. Jura was worried Dudian might be afraid of darkness, so she lit an oil lamp early on. She was filled with an amazing feeling every time she saw his face lit up by the flickering flame. "It's going to rain again." "What about Uncle?" Dudian said as he glanced out the window. Jura smiled at this boy's worries and said, "Uncle has a lot of work to do these days, so he will not be coming back tonight. Are you hungry? What's for dinner?" "Good boy. I'm going to let you taste this craft of mine. I guarantee you will love it," Jura said with confidence. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. Dudian met his new father, Gray. He was a tall, thin middle-aged man. His looks were quite ordinary, but he had a gentle character. Gray was a tailor by profession. The sewing machine in the house was used by him. Black snow season was coming, so he brought his sewing machine from the factory to the house, as there was no heating at the factory. They had apparently discussed the adoption of a child beforehand. However, Gray was surprised at Dudion's good extraordinary looks when they first met. Aside from the introverted personality, Gray greatly approved of him. As another common storm of the rainy season was pouring down, Dudien had the sudden urge to use the restroom. He got out of bed, put on his shoes, and gently opened the door to leave. He was passing by his parents when he heard their voices. So late. Why have they not gone to sleep yet? Suddenly Dudien's heart jumped. Apparently, this world did not consider noise when building houses. He heard subtle voices from the room. Do you really want to do this? Dudien heard Jura's hesitant voice sounding from inside. I know you are quite taken with this child. To tell the truth, I am as well. I can't bear to part with him. However, this is a rare opportunity. If the Avril house has a good impression of him, we can move to the business area to find better jobs. If you still feel lonely, we can adopt another child. It's quite the good deal. It's not the money I'm worried about. If he goes to Avril house and refuses to speak, they will bully him. There are two types of people in this world. I once saw a doctor get into a large family and only became a servant and. A deathly silence struck the room before Gray continued. Jura, you know that he was just an orphan in the slums. Even if we didn't adopt him, he would be adopted into another family as a serf. Also, a servant's life in the Avril house is an enviable position to many people. But this is decided. There is no more room for further discussion. Silence fell upon the room once again. The small figure in front of the room had his head down. He lightly clenched his hands into a fist and then slowly loosened them. He dragged his body back to his room as if he were a corpse. Even his previous intention of a restroom break was forgotten. Dudien was listening to the rhythmic sounds of the rain splattering outside as he sat on his bed. His heart felt pained. Although he had only been with the couple for a month, Jura had always meticulously cared for him. It touched him the bottom of his heart. He never expected those feelings to be shattered in a matter of seconds. It was as if the world was mocking him and throwing his heart back into disarray. He suddenly felt very lonely. He began to miss his harsh and gentle mother and father, as he reminisced about he would always pinch his sister's ear. Why? He wanted to cry for a moment. He clenched his fists while an idea slowly began to surface in his mind. Since he was never going to see his parents or sister again, then let this strange new world. Nobody knew that on this one rainy night, a small figure slowly made up his mind to alter the gears of history forever. Chapter 5. The Dark King, Chapter 5. The World of Darkness. The next morning, Gray sat on a stool near the table. He was holding the residential area newspaper mailed in the morning. There were information about recent news about various parts of the neighborhood, as well as number of recruitment advertisements into various factories. Jura was busy in the kitchen making breakfast. She brought up meals to the table. Everything was the same as usual. Dudien's biological clock sounded, waking him up from sleep. He folded his bed, washed his face and went over to kitchen. He greeted Jura couple with simple "good morning" and took a sit near the table to begin to eat the breakfast. At this time, Jura carried Dudien's share and put it opposite to him. As Dudien tasted the meal, Jura asked with a slight smile on her face, "How's the taste?" "A bit spicy," replied Dudien. "I like spicy food." "That's good." Jura smiled. Gray then put down the newspaper, looked over the table towards Dudien. "Dean, your aunt and I have chosen a marriage for you. You have to be prepared today. So dress up well, and because we are going to meet some people." Due to the requirements of Dudien, Gray and Jura have temporarily accepted to be addressed as uncle and aunt. After last night's situation, Dudien's mind has calmed down. Pretending to be an innocent kid without any awareness, he blankly asked, "What is the affair?" Jura looked at Dudien and whispered. To Gray, "You see, I said Dean is still small. We could wait for a few years more. Age of 13 is the legal age of marriage." Gray looked back at her. There was a bit coldness in his eyes and said, "Let's just get him engaged for now. Being a few years ahead won't harm no one." Jura saw her husband, mind firmly decided on marriage, no longer said anything. "We'll take you to a nice big sister," Gray said to Dudien. "It's a great opportunity for you and do all you can to get her approval. So that you can eat a lot of good food every day, wear good clothes and never go hungry. Do you know what I mean?" "Really?" "I will," Dudien replied with calm mind. Moreover, he had a surprised look on his face which made it look like more realistic. Gray's face turned in a big wide smile, said, "Really good. Dean is a good boy." "All right," decided, "eat first." Soon, all of them finished their meals. Dudien made a great, eager performance. As a result, Gray had a relieved look. "Come over, Dean. First put on new clothes." Jura took Dudien to the cabinet where a brand new black suit, bright red tie, and shiny shoes were placed. She let Dudien change. After he was dressed, eyes of Jura and Gray could not help but lit up. Dudien's pale snow-like skin and black eyes were giving him an aristocratic feeling. "What a beauty!" Jura laughed heartily. Gray's heart was overjoyed. "Excellent, let's go." "Ah." Dudien tried to look very excited and astonished. After locking up the door, Jura came over to hold Dudien's hand and asked Gray, "It's a bit early. Can we find carriages?" Gray smiled and said, "Here, in vain. But I was told in Avril House that they will send a carriage to pick us up." At the same time, da-da-da and hoof sounds came up from corner of the street. A carriage with golden ornaments turned over and came up to stop just before them. On the roof of the carriage was a silver-white flag with a white flower engraved on it, which was flag banner of Avril House. The driver was wearing a black high-heeled hat and a black suit. He jumped out of the carriage, smiled and said, "Gray and Jura, the lady has been waiting for you." He leaned his chest sideways to invite them into carriage, demonstrating noble aristocratic manner. Gray heart jumped and began to flatter, "How can we make Miss Ivy wait? It would be very rude." Onto the carriage. He quickly held Dudien's hand and in a forced manner got them into carriage. At this time, the coachman seemed to have noticed Dudien. His eyes flashed with a trace of the color of surprise, but immediately resumed his polite smile. Da-da-da. After Dudien's family sit in the carriage, the driver shake off the rope, the carriage began to ride. Dudien was silently watching at the buildings passing by, as well as the pedestrians who were passing by the roadside. Most of them had surprised and awe-inspiring look at the carriage. At this time Gray and Jura did not speak, and no longer asked Dudien anything, worried about falling into the ears of the driver, and later spread to Avril home. Carriage reached south side of the giant wall in a smooth drive. The young guard at the gate made a fist against chest salute as soon as his eyes detected the flag on top of carriage's roof. He made way for them to pass instantly. Later on he calmed down and restored his work, continuing to check those who want to enter the business district. "This is the business district." Dudien looked at the clean street outside the carriage. The road was clean and pedestrians had beautiful clothes. Immediately, the difference with the residential area could be felt. As in comparison with the slums, it was like the difference between heaven and hell, without any exaggeration. Soon, the coachman parked the carriage in the street at the end of an exquisite elegant building. Dudien saw that on the building hung a cardboard piano sign. Painting was very realistic. He couldn't but wonder how the piano was retained in this poor and incomplete world. The carriage stopped at the main entrance. Then a black-suited young man walked quickly out of the mansion, looking down the carriage to Gray and Jura. He smiled and said, "Miss has waited for a long time, please come with me." Leading the way. Gray had an inexplicable tension in his heart as it was absolutely impossible to see the magnificent buildings at the residential area. Straightening his back a bit and holding Dudien's hand, Gray walked in front. As soon as Gray couple went into the hall, their eyes were attracted by agate jewel-like brilliant oil lamp light. Jura's performance was better, as she was invited to cure people in the business district several times. She was slightly calm. For Gray, it was the first time to come to such a place. Dudien, through holding his hand, felt the man was slightly nervous, as his body was slightly trembling. He could not help but shook his head in mind. Sound of music was echoed in the hall. Dudien, at first glance, saw the hall is extremely spacious. Many people sat there to eat snacks, listen to music, whisper to chat. They had very gorgeous dresses. Fabric of clothing, dress lines, and materials seemed much better than the ones used in residential area. Especially the color contrast was much more visible. Black suit young man gently made a gesture toward the inside of a separate room. Dudian looked to see two figures sitting there. A middle-aged beauty woman, about 30 years old. She had a tailored delicate skirt and very mild look on her face. Next to her was sitting an 11-year-old girl, fair complexion, a brown hair, oval face, although not yet mature, but definitely a beauty. The little girl also noticed the face of the Gray family. Eyes swept over the two adults and fell on the body of Dudian. Eyes flashed a trace of surprise. At this time, that middle-aged woman stood up to greet Jura with smiles. Dr. Jura, the last time my family master's illness was cured thanks to you. Today he has a business to deal with, so he won't be here. Gray said, Mr. Avril is busy, man. Middle-aged woman replied with a smile, first sit. Yes, yes. Gray immediately opened the chair and sat down. Perhaps he was too tight to begin with, so the chair's foot knocked on the ground a bit forcefully. People who were sitting close by immediately raised their eyebrows and began to softly chat. Jura sat down too. The middle-aged woman's eyes fell on Dudian's body, her eyes also passing a trace of surprised color. As if relieved, looked over to Gray, smiled and said, This is your adopted child, really white. Gray replied to praise Avril House's daughter, Your house lady is too beautiful. So small, delicate and beautiful. She looks very smart. She has inherited your beauty. Middle-aged beauty woman smiled, suddenly said, On to the marriage. Gray body tightened, Jura looked a little nervous. If Ania doesn't have reprisal, it would be so. Middle-aged woman was unexpectedly straightforward. Gray and Jura glanced towards each other in surprise. At this time, the little girl looked at Dudian and suddenly spoke, I want to go out with him. Middle-aged beauty woman seems to have expected her words, smiled and looked to Gray and Jura. Gray responded, even said, Dean, accompany Miss Ania to go out. Remember to take care of Miss Ania. He patted Dudian's shoulder, to give him encouragement. At this time, Ania got off the seat, turned and walked toward the outside, did not look at Dudian, did not stop waiting for him. Dudian looked at Gray and Jura, whose eyes were filled with encouragement and hope. His heart was very quiet. He said, hello, to middle-aged beauty and turned around to keep up with Ania, leaving the hall. The child is quite sensible. Middle-aged woman looked at the back of Dudian, smiled and said one. Fortunately, Gray whispered in low tone. To the outside of the street. Ania looked at the black suit servant and waved her small delicate hand, do not have to follow, I will walk in the vicinity. Yes, Mississippi. Black suit young servant replied. When he left, Ania continued to walk in front, did not look back, and did not speak with Dudian, as if she was alone. Dudian had learned to endure loneliness, quietly followed behind her. By observing the buildings on both sides of the street, from these local customs, he could infer the world's approximate standard of living and technological level. After a long walk, Ania suddenly stopped. Dudian was looking around and walking, so he almost hit her back. Only to smell the fragrance of fragrant flowers, floated from her clothes, quickly took a step back to get distance between them. At this time, Ania turned her body. Because of the age advantage, she was slightly higher than Dudian by half head. Her beautiful white oval face, without the slightest expression, quietly overlooked Dudian. There was a feeling of indifferent aura from Ania. Dudian had a faint, so quietly looked up at her. Seeing Dudian's calmness, Ania's eyes flashed a trace of surprise, but soon returned to the cold expression, said, Have you ever heard of opera? Dudian suddenly was surprised for a moment. He did not think she would suddenly come up with a relevant topic. Subconsciously answer no by moving his head. Ania did not give him the opportunity to speak, continued, You heard about music styles? No. Dudian was about to say. Do you know ballroom dance? Ania, tone of indifference, did not give him the opportunity to answer. Dudian had come to understand that this is not a polite question but filled with undisguised contempt. He silently watched the girl. Do you know how to ride the horse? Do you know swordsmanship? Do you have ideals and pursuits? Ania asked 6 questions in one breath, then looked at Dudian calmly, and said, if you are a clever child, you should already understand that you and I are not the people of the same world. Dudienne quietly looked at her beautiful face, did not expect such a sharp or even mean words to come up from mouth of a child who is 3 or 4 years older than him. Chapter 6. The Dark King, Chapter 6. Perfect. There is no common language between us. Ania indifferent eyes swept over Dudienne's face and continued, if your mother didn't help to cure my father's disease, we would have never met. Do not try to think that by virtue of this kindness, you can climb over the social barriers and join our family. I, Ania, will not marry an incompetent husband and lose face. Although you desperately imitate elegance and noblesse while pretending to be an aristocratic gentleman, you cannot hide away your roots in from of real aristocracy. Civilians are not nurtured from birth and lack noble blood. Practicing for a day or two cannot cover up your natural stature. Annie looked at Dudienne coldly. You may look clean, different from those smelly neighborhood workers, but it is not anything surprising. The ideas that I would ever fancy you, let you into our Avril house, or help your parents join the commercial district are nothing but a joke. It is only wishful thinking on your part. My father's kindness to your family is out of politeness. It does not mean they should act shamelessly and throw away their self-respect. You cannot even grasp the severity of the consequences. Dudienne quietly watched and waited for her to finish. After saying so much in a single breath, she could not help but frown seeing that Dudienne's calm expression did not change at all. Again, with a cold face, she continued. I said all of this so that you may understand that you are not good enough for me, and I would never allow you to be my husband. Stop fantasizing about unrealistic dreams. Dudienne still quietly looked at her and spoke. Finished. Ania sneered. Finished. If you have anything to say, go ahead. Dudienne laughed and looked into her eyes. Softly speaking. First of all, I must thank you. Ania's expression turned to one of confusion and disbelief. Dudienne ignored her reaction and continued. First, thank you for rejecting me. This way I can avoid being in conflict with my parents. Ania had a doubt in her heart. Was his father not trying to stuff him into their house? Second, thank you again. Thank you for letting me know that even a little girl like you cannot be ignored. Ania's brows pricked up. She matured early in comparison to the other kids who were still playing around. She already had her future planned by the time she was 8 years old. Nevertheless, this child in front of her spoke in an old-fashioned tone, as if he had experienced a lot in life. When she was ready to speak again, Dudienne turned his body to leave. He didn't pause or look back. Maybe I am not competent with a sword, nor am I a fine equestrian, but I do have my own ideals and ambitions. She was not able to react until his shadow had disappeared from sight. Never would she have expected such actions from this small child. He even dared to leave first. Her red face displayed the anger in her heart. However, her excellent childhood education and training allowed her to quickly control her emotions. She grit her teeth and stamped her heels. She moved to keep up with her fastest speed while maintaining a lady's composure. As Dudienne returned to the hall, he slowed his pace down so that Ania could catch up. He paused and did not look back. Soon, Annie reached his back with her aristocratic ladylike grace. Wait a minute. If the adults ask, tell them that you have someone else that you like. Restarting his pace, Dudienne replied, why would I do that? If I have not guessed wrongly, your father should have already agreed to the marriage, he said indifferently. But you did not. That is to say that, if I agree we are getting married, aren't we? Ania's aggressive expression suddenly paled. If Dudienne chooses to agree, her father would go on with the marriage. Today, she and her mother planned on deliberately put pressure on the Grey couple so that they would not ask for her hand in marriage. How did you know? You pretty much told me. Dudienne said lightly. If you have the option to decline, then you can simply reject the marriage with a no. Moreover, you would not have to say so much or even threaten me. Your mother, on the other hand, is a bit tricky though. I think she will be able to get a direct refusal from my adoptive parents. Ania was shocked. Dudienne had repeated the plan she and her mother had come up with almost word for word. For a moment, she felt as if she was completely seen through by this little boy who was still as calm as the moment she met him. However, she did not regret her choice. After a moment of silence, she continued, if I decline, I am worried that your parents will go to my father. Dudien shook his head slightly. No, as long as you refuse this marriage, things will pass. Everything would have been very simple, but instead you made it more complex. How would you know? Ania frowned. She was irritated by Dudien's confident tone. You overestimated their guts and underestimated their self-awareness, explained Dudien. She was not convinced and did not expect too much, but had to have the patience to try. Ania frowned, thinking for a bit. Why do you not just say there is another girl who you like? Are you not a noble woman? Do you not understand the fact that you can refuse, but I cannot, said Dudien as he looked directly at her. Ania looked at him and smiled in realization. By my refusal, you want them to assume that you were just not good enough for me so that they are not angry with you. Dudien knew his plan was seen through, but he felt no embarrassment. Anyway, I have already told you what you should do. I am in no position to decline, so think of the consequences on your own. Finished speaking, Dudien went towards the entrance without waiting for Ania. You. Ania only stared at his back. She angrily stamped her feet and followed into the mansion. Welcome back, Mississippi. The black suit servant was relieved when he saw Dudien and Ania appear. His face sported a huge smile. Ania was indeed of noble birth. After a few steps, her anger was replaced by calmness. A carriage bearing the banner of a white flower drove through the commercial area to the residential area. Dudien's family alighted from the carriage and proceeded to their home as soon as the carriage stopped. Jura looked at her husband's gloomy face. Holding Dudien's hand, she opened the door. What a lame excuse. Clearly they despise our identities. Aristocrats, ha! Group of hypocrites. At home, Gray vented the anger in your heart. Hush! Jura said. You have to whisper, don't let anyone else hear you. Gray stifled up, sitting quietly in bitterness. Speaking ill of the aristocracy was a massive crime. Dean, go back to your room and rest. You must be tired. I'll call you out for dinner. Jura said to Dudien. Gray looked at the child. His lips slightly moved, but he did not speak. Although his heart was heavy, with these months together, he knew that Dudien was a good kid that would never do anything impolite. He could only blame himself and his wife for setting their sights too high. Dudien nodded and went up to his room. After 4 long months, the rainy season had finally ended and revealed the sunny skies. Gray looked at Dudien, who had woken up early. He smiled and said, Dean, various schools will be starting soon. Would you like to go to school to learn reading and writing? Chapter 7. The Dark King, Chapter 7. Radiation Values. Dudien nodded slightly. Before mentioning school, Gray had expressed his hope that Dudien would inherit his sewing skills and become a good tailor. Dudien had a goal, so he directly had refused Gray. Gray and his wife were not angry. It is a good thing for children to have their own opinions. They were not serfs. So, it is plausible for them to have a child with an assertive personality. Unfortunately, the medical field is just too difficult to get started in, Jura said with some regret. Dudien was a clever child, but unfortunately, it was too late to begin studies to become a doctor. Well, what do you want to study? Gray smiled. Dudien looked up at them and spoke, the law. Law. Gray hesitated a bit. Dean, do you know what sort of career that is? Jura asked. I know it is one of the 3 major civilian occupations. Lawyers also have more prestige than doctors. Actually, Gray had brought a career table to Dudien. It had information regarding job descriptions and qualifications needed to work in each field. This table had helped Dudien gain a better understanding of possible career paths and their respective benefits. I just want to be a bit clear. The law school is the hardest to graduate from. It's even more difficult than studying medicine. You need very flexible thinking and logical ability. Although you are a smart boy, keep in mind the difference between law school's level of difficulty compared to what you had in orphanage. It is very difficult to graduate from law school and become a qualified official. Dudien looked straight at him, insisting, I want to study law no matter what. Gray frowned slightly. This was the first time Dudien was so persistent in front of them, so he didn't know how to refuse. Ever since Avril House refused the marriage proposal, Gray and Jura had begun to accept Dudien as their own child. Thus, they didn't want to hurt his feelings. If the kid wants to study, then let him do it. Even if he can't enter the court in the future, being an ordinary lawyer is acceptable too. At least he will be familiar with the law. He won't knowingly break the rules and can lead a peaceful life. Dudian looked at her while silently thinking, I want to study the law, not to comply, but to break it. Gray sighed and said, all right. Dudian's heart flushed with relief. He looked at them, sounded a bright, thank you. When he heard Dudian, Gray's face broke into a smile again as he spoke, if this is your choice, then stick to it. If you want to give up sometime in the future, then you are going to come back to learn sewing with me. A textile worker's wage is good enough to at least feed yourself. Dudian nodded slightly. After the rainy season ended, the temperatures also picked up a lot. 3 days before school assessment was a special festival called Prayer Day. Each household in groups goes to the central neighborhood to Cathedral of Via. They pray to Father the God, to let them safely pass through the next season and help them to avoid plagues and diseases. It was a grand ceremony. Gray and his wife went to pray with Dudian. Dudian also first met the world's leader in faith, Holy Church. There was a bright cathedral built in a residential sub-area. A huge sculpture of the four-winged angel sculpture was built in the middle of the square, with both hands embracing all the believers, full of kindness and harmony. 3 days after the prayer day, various schools began their enrollments. Dudian was led by the Gray couple to law school. They walked for about 10 kilometers to reach their destination. Parents and children were bustling in front of the entrance, dressed mostly in simple clothing. Most of them had clear skin color, with few others with yellowish skin. There were almost no people with rough skin, which meant that those of lower social statuses didn't even bother to bring their children for the enrollment examination. After all, the law school was a notorious one in Silva, and tuition fees were expensive. Citizens of low status couldn't afford the fees. I heard that you not only want to enter the law school, but you want to do so through the assessment. Yeah, but if it does not go through, I'm thinking about Sewing Institute or maybe Geological Institute. I do not know either. The assessment should be quite hard. Some parents talked quietly. Have the law school's assessment begun yet? It should be similar to our medical school assessment. Jura blinked, bowed to Dudian, said, I remember the test usually asks a few simple things. Our medical college examination was about memory. It should be almost the same here. Gray drew over and smiled, it is up to you now. It depends on your own performance. In case you fail, there is nothing to worry about, as we can go to Sewing Institute for registration. Dudian's mind turned with disdain. He would be more than happy if the examination was a simple memory examination. In the old era, children with an IQ range of 120 to 140 were labeled as geniuses. His daredevil sister had 142 IQ. However, his result from IQ test was 168. He would never forget the day that he was accepted to Harvard University at the tender age of 12. The siblings' IQ was high because of inherited gene from their parents. Both were internationally renowned scientists. If the disaster didn't break out, they should have gained an International Science Award with their invention of the cold storage technology. Now, it was Dudian's turn to enter, as the children before him had gone into the assessment room in succession. Parents should stay here. Child, go into the assessment room. A middle-aged scholar-like person blocked the Gray couple. Dean, good luck. Jura tried to inspire Dudian. Dudian saw the happiness reflect in her eyes. In the spacious room, Dudian saw a man and a woman. 2 middle-aged examiners dressed in black robes lined with complex gold silk embroidery patterns. They looked simple and gorgeous. They saw Dudian, smiled and said, Child, come over. Dudian stepped forward. I will ask you a question. You have a frying pan and it can fry only 2 fish at the same time. To fry one side takes a minute. If I would like to fry 3 fish, what is the shortest amount of time it would take? Middle-aged woman smiled. 3 minutes, said Dudian without thinking. The question was not difficult, but both examiners got surprised. Even the cleverest children would need some time to think before answering the question. To answer correctly directly without any time to consider. They had quite a positive impression on him. You pass, child. You are very smart. The right middle-aged man smiled, said. Take this and go next to the physical examination. If there are no problems in physical examination, you can officially begin your studies in law school. He handed a small note to Dudienne which had few words written on it. There is a physical examination. Dudienne's eyebrows wrinkled as he turned and left the room. So hard. I answered 4 minutes and I was told that it was wrong. How come it is not 4 minutes? If both sides must be fried, certainly 4 minutes ah. This question, why fish, ah? I do not like to eat fish, and fried fish and the law have nothing in common ah. Well, my father is a chef. He could cook 3 fish in a minute. They did not believe it. Dudienne went out and heard a few children coming out from next rooms. They were dissatisfied with the examination question. His mouth twitched a little. He turned back to wait in front of the gray couple as if he had not heard their words. How did it go? Gray smiled. He heard the words of the children. Although it is not clear what the specific test was, it seems it was not so easy to pass. Dudienne lightly glanced at him and said, passed. Now I need go to the physical examination. Gray smiled, but was discouraged as he wanted Dudienne to go to sewing institute. Nevertheless, the thought of Dudienne being smarter than other children enraptured him. The physical examination is to detect the value of your body's radiation. Dean's skin color is too white, so the radiation value is certainly not high. He should pass this one easily. Jura seems to know something about the physical exam, so she spoke with confidence. After the global nuclear explosion, the world was full of nuclear radiation. The silver-gray clouds in the sky were the result of gathering of large number of nuclear radiation debris. That's why there was long rainy season in this world. An extremely dangerous, and even fatal rainy season that brought illness and death in its wake. However, Dudienne had come out from the cold storage. He had only been here for a few months, so the body radiation value should not be high. But he was curious. How these people detect the radiation value? What kind of instrument do they use? They haven't even stepped into industrial era, nor do they even know what electricity is. At this time, Jura took him to a room next to a physical examination sign. There was no line. After all, the people who passed the first assessment were too few. In the room sat a middle-aged woman. She checked the note in Dudienne's hand and spoke. All right, let's go with the test. Dudienne approached the woman. He looked over but did not see any extraordinary instrument. Only a row of glass tubes similar to thermometers. Middle-aged women checked the note again to confirm, then from the side picked up a clean glass tube. The sharp end of the tube was positioned near Dudienne's pinky finger. She smiled and said, "Child, do not be afraid. It won't hurt." Dudienne did not expect that a glass tube as small as that was used to detect the radiation value. Soon, Dudienne's red blood began to penetrate the glass tube. Dudienne noted that the glass tube had scales with a hair-width silky red line. Middle-aged women checked again to confirm there is no mistakes. She could not help but be stunned at Dudienne's result. His skin color was too white, even the same-age girls were not so white. Her eyes revealed a trace of confusion and she spoke. To gray couple with emotion, the value of such a low radiation level. It's the first time I've seen it. Too incredible. A healthy body such as his would normally only appear in the commercial district. Jura clearly understood the radiometer. Her face was filled shock and then relief. She turned to her lost husband. This is a radiometer, a special apparatus used to test human radiation value. Dean's radiation value is very low. It is comparable with those aristocratic children. Gray knew the importance of human radiation value, but did not care a bit. But when Jura said, comparable with those aristocratic children, his pride suddenly went over the horizon. He touched Dudienne's hair. Dudienne glanced at the red line on the radiometer, suddenly feeling this line twisting slightly. It seems that it was a living thing. In the evening of the day when Dudienne registered to law school, in a castle in the commercial district. A luxury room was covered in diamond mosaics. A shadow-like silhouette in the room was silently looking at the information in front of his desk. Test results released. There are 27 qualified candidates. Chapter 8. The Dark King, Chapter 8. Giant Wall of Silva. The person near the desk did not rise. The shadow kneeling on the ground who brought the message, respectfully clenched his chest. In the next moment he disappeared, leaving only the white letter on the desk. The stalwart figure's eyes fell on the white paper. Blade-like dense eyebrows were picked a little. Opening his eyes, he briefly glanced at the new document. Suddenly his eyes were focused on detection value in the bottom corner of the paper. Staring at this figure, he looked for a while. Later on he got up, put the coat on and opened the door. In the hall, middle-aged housekeeper looked at the master, surprised. "Master, so late, do you have to go out?" "Ah," said the stalwart figure, "prepare the carriage." 300 years ago, very big scourge came to earth. Our ancestors fought hard, survived the adversity by strength and built the gigantic Sylvian wall to isolate the disaster and keep it outside the giant wall. The giant wall cannot be desecrated by the vile creatures, did you know? Said a white-bearded old man in a solemn voice. Although his beard was white, in fact he was in his early 60s. But in here it has been regarded as a longevity. Dudien listened attentively. 3 days have passed after the registration. This is his first official class today. This old man did not come up to explain the knowledge of the law, but a brief introduction from some well-known things. It seems that the purpose is only to talk about things which children are familiar with, so to consolidate their hearts under the faith. The story of Silva's giant wall is known to almost every child. They have listened their parents talking about it once in a while. Only the orphans didn't know about the Silva's history. Other children hearing the story are bored. But due to the first time to seeing this white-beard elderly, most of them are afraid and avoiding rash decisions. Dudien was relished hearing white-bearded men talk. These are the information what he most wanted to know at the moment. Seeing the old man to not go into in-depth explanation, he could not but raise his hands to ask a question. "Teacher, can you say what is the natural disaster?" White-beard old man and other children were surprised a moment. Nobody expected Dudien to be so bold. To dare to take the initiative to ask question, and moreover so well-known thing. Actually some of them were puzzled and couldn't understand why to ask such a question. Old man saw Dudien's serious and hopeful look. He did not bear to fight the child's enthusiasm. However, a thought passed in his mind: is this child's parents did not tell him? There are a lot of natural disasters. Volcanic eruptions, flooding, earthquake splitting and so on, he replied with a smile on his lips. Dudien did not give up and continued to ask, "Just these?" The old man was silent for a moment but continued nevertheless, "These disasters are terrible. Haven't you listened to your parents talk? The volcanic eruption alone is enough to kill countless people. The dark clouds in the sky are caused by these volcanic eruptions." Dudien frowned slightly. Did not say anything, though his heart was pensive, because he knew about the details of the disaster that happened 300 years ago. It is not simply a natural disaster. Although the old man said that the various disasters have occurred, but all of them were caused by nuclear explosions. Obviously these children did not know the real cause of the disaster, and someone blocked the information from inside. Perhaps to block the information that insider is so influential that maybe even they rule over this post-disaster era. "Teacher, my mother said it was very dangerous outside the giant wall. If we go out we will die, is it really true?" A little fat kid who saw Dudien asking questions, made up his courage and raised his hand. The old man looked at children and spoke with a serious tone. "Yes, outside the giant wall devils dwell and plague overwhelms. Once out, nobody comes back. It is thanks to giant wall that we can leisurely sit here to study, eat rice and vegetables. We have to acknowledge and respect the giant wall." The abbot refers to the person who studies the law. Like Dudien, these children are beginning to learn the law. They are referred as trainee of discipline. If you graduate, through the assessment of the trial, will be able to become a priest or abbot. It is a very sacred position. Same in status as nobility. Not only able to freely access to commercial and residential districts, but also to enter into the wall area. The devil and the plague, all children are scared pale. Even if they are small, they also know how terrible these two are. There is a hint of curiosity in Dudien's heart. He naturally does not believe in existence of so-called devils. Nuclear-bombed explosions has baptized the world. Most probably some of the biological variations have gone extinct or evolved. This explanation is only made up to intimidate the children. Of course, the object of intimidation is not just children but adults too. This makes him more curious. How is the world outside the giant wall? What is the appearance after the nuclear bomb explosions? Has it become just a virgin forest because there is no one to develop? Time to finish the class. White-beard old man looked at Hourglass and said. The other children cheered at once. At this time, the door opened and suddenly two young people clothed in black leather armor walked into the classroom. White-beard old man was about to question them, but as soon as he noticed the black metal on shoulders of those two, his face suddenly piled up into a smile. Are you here to take children? Dudien was confused as he heard the white-beard man talk. He was vigilant and doubtful at these two people's appearance. One of the slim young people nodded. He looked indifferently and spoke. Now I will say names. Those who I mentioned, stand up. Do you all understand? His eyes swept the audience. All the children were instantly tensed up. White-beard old man spoke up to comfort the children. Do not worry. These two adults are guards. Those mentioned by them will have a hope to join the public service. This is an enormous event. Public office. Dudien heard Jura talking about it. In short, it is the equivalent of the civil servants of the old era. For a lifetime need not worry about their livelihood. In this world it is the dream of many civilians' occupation. However, Dudien noted the medal on shoulders of two men. After he entered the neighborhood from the slums, he had yet to meet a guard with such medals. The standard leather armor is also different. As he saw teaching staff to be in awe of the officers, a trace of doubt emerged in his heart. Lock. Young officer said. Out loud. A weak child sitting on table in front of Dudia said in a weak tone, Here. Stand up. Officer shouted. The frail child jumped up at once. Marta. Yes. A girl quickly stood up. Lammer. Carly. Carly, who was named, stood up. Officer shouted, Dudien. Dudien eyes squinted, slowly stand up. Up to this point, including him, there were 8 children selected. Chapter 9. The Dark King, Chapter 9. Hunters and Scavengers. You 8, come with us. Young officer looked at little Dudien eyes, said coldly, turned away with the companion and left the classroom. White-bearded old man saw Dudien and other 8 did not move, quickly said, This is your lucky chance. Other people would love to have that chance. Hearing his words, a tall child who stood out because of his height, with courageous steps took the lead of the 8 and left the classroom. Dudien walked at the end. He was quietly watching the selected children, trying to contrast and compare the selected ones with the ones left in the classroom. But soon he came to an understanding that there is no common ground, at least from color, appearance, or any other external feature to distinguish the selected ones from the rest of the students. No external feature, then the only option left is inner qualification. He suddenly thought of preschool physical examination. It was the most suspicious event. As he was dazzled in his thoughts, the other children had come to the great playground outside the law school. As they arrived here, Dudien saw a black carriage parked in front of the college. The iron bars and a huge rivet were embedded on the carriage, giving it an extra strong look. The horses that were pulling the carriage looked much more magnificent. They were nearly 3 meters tall and had their bodies covered by helmet and armor. It was as if an amazing beast stood there, but not a horse. It was not only Dudien that was surprised. Other children were stunned at sight too. Come on, get into the carriage, said the young officer. All the children hesitated for a moment. The tall child who was going in front of the kids, seemingly shouldering the leader's identity, asked, May I ask, where are we going? Fit officer stared at him coldly and said, Just get into the carriage. At the sharp looks of the officer, the tall child's hairs inverted up and his face turned pale because of fear. He did not dare to ask another question. Carefully avoiding the giant horse, he began to climb up the carriage. Other children who saw this, silently, followed Locke, the tall child, into the carriage. The carriage was extremely spacious and more than enough to accommodate the 8 children. Dudien sat in the corner. The 2 children who were sitting next to him had tension on their faces. He quietly looked to the front of the carriage where driver jumped up. The world was more dangerous than he imagined. Although there was law, it is clear that certain beings are able to ignore the law. As for human rights, In the feudal society in which serfs and aristocrats existed, equality and freedom were never part of human rights. So being delusional enough to believe in rule of law was an outrageous idea. The carriage galloped away from the College of the Law in an extremely fast speed. The buildings on both sides of the road swiftly retreated out of sight. It was not long before Dudien saw a high wall. The wall was inscribed with a large word. Dudien had learned a lot of words from Jura couple in the past few months. So he knew the exact meaning of the word. Dudien recognized that this is the residential area leading to the wall of the commercial district. Is this carriage going to take them to the business district? Other children clearly recognized this point too and then thought of the old white-beard teacher. Afterwards the tension in their heart was suddenly replaced by surprise and their faces were full of excited expression. Every child in the carriage was eager to enter the aristocracy and the rich life of the commercial district. Dudien was not surprised. To be able to bring out children directly from the law school was an indication that there is a great force behind these people. What was important at this point, is their purpose good or bad for them? Soon, the carriage flew past the concert hall building where Dudien had traveled previously. See this building? Dudien could not help but think of the little girl's sharp questioning discourse. Suddenly feel a little funny, although he thought he would sooner or later enter the civilian area of the business district, but did not expect just in a month to come back. Before long, the black carriage came to stop in front of a castle. The black uniformed officer sitting at the front of the carriage jumped down, opened the door and shouted at the crowd, "Get off." All children obediently got off the carriage. Dudien was the last one, but when he was just going to get off, the man suddenly said, "Finished here." He looked back to the front of the driver position, shake off the whip, drove the carriage away. Leaving only the original 7 children get off, Dudien felt lost. Dudien's face slightly changed. His heartbeat slightly raised. He opened the carriage curtain to look at the figure of 7 children until they disappeared out of his sight. After a carriage turned over a corner, his line of sight was totally blocked. Dudien turned his face to see the officer sitting in the empty carriage. Many thoughts turned up in his mind. Escape. Resistance. Obviously, he was up to the mercy of the opposite party. Soon, the carriage stopped in front of a manor. This one was a very vast manor. It was covered by a white lacquer wood fence. An extremely smooth green grass was pruning all over the place. At the moment there were several gardeners who were watering the lawn. The door opened and young officer looked Dudien. His cold face turned into a smile. "Little guy, you are quite calm." Dudien saw his smile. Dudien was slightly startled and his heart tensed a bit. But he calmed down and directly asked, "Is it because of the radiation values?" Officer seemed to change to another individual as his previous tone and appearance were nowhere to be seen. Wide smile on his face, he said, "Pretty clever." "Yes, it's because of the radiation values. They are barely qualified, even through a rough training they could only become scavengers. But you, well, there is a hope for you to join hunters. The scavengers and the hunters." As Dudien heard these 2 words, he was a bit perplexed. Dudien asked, "Who are the scavengers? Come over first." The men reached out to hold Dudien as he got off the carriage. They began to walk towards the manor. The scavengers are responsible for the giant wall to develop out of the security zone. They are mainly looking for available resources. Out of the giant wall. Dudien was surprised as it was no small matter. It turned out to be working outside the giant wall. That white-bearded old man obviously knew this. Even though white-bearded men told them that there is plague and devils outside the giant wall and nobody could survive there. Although Dudien did not believe in devils, but there is no doubt that the giant wall is extremely dangerous. At least the air radiation is much higher outside the giant wall. Ah, radiation. Suddenly Dudien, as if sobering up from hangover, come to understand. No wonder the radiation value will be used to distinguish between scavengers and hunters. Most of the environment outside the giant wall is extremely bad, very high radiation. If the body itself has too high radiation, outside the wall it will be easy to reach saturation. Only the people with low radiation values could survive out there. Understanding this point, his heart could not help but suck down the cold lump. People behind the so-called medical examination are responsible for the secret assessment of civilians. Chapter 10. The Dark King, Chapter 10. Light. Physique. What do hunters do? Dudien couldn't help but ask, is it dangerous outside the giant wall? What is the danger lurking outside the giant wall? Lots of terrifying things came into his mind. His face became pale, but fortunately his skin color was white, so his fear was not too prominent. You're smart. The slim officer smiled and said, outside the giant wall is. The men next to him frowned and said, Fernando, we have not confirmed his identity yet, do not talk too much. Surprised for a moment, Fernando shrugged, does not matter. His measured radiation value is 0.8. It's lower than 1, so he probably has the light physique. We have to do the test. Do not come to an early conclusion, the second man frowned. Fernando paused to think for a moment, before he bowed to Dudien and said, you can only wait until the test finishes so that I can tell you. Nevertheless, at that time someone will explain everything to you. Dudien heard their conversation and was slightly confused. Light physique. What does that mean? Wait a few minutes and you will know. Fernando mysteriously laughed. All three of them walked into the manor. Several gardeners who were sprinkling the lawn respectfully nodded their heads in salute as the three of them passed by. They walked on the white stone path paved in the middle of the lawn. A giant door, more than 10 meters high, was opened for them to enter. Fernando led Dudien into one of the steeple towers within the mansion. Walking up the steps, Fernando led Dudien into a dark room on the top floor. On their way, all the servants who saw them stood still and respectfully nodded as they passed by. Dudien looked into the dark room. There were no windows, but instead a small hole just enough to ventilate the room. It was also covered with a black curtain, so it must have been a while since sunshine had infiltrated the room. The air in the room was cold, like the temperature of the early rainy season. In the center of the room there was a metal table covered on top with a black cloth. Fernando walked towards the metal table. He took off the black cloth to reveal a smooth crystal ball. White chilly air was released from the crystal ball. The crystal ball was actually a sphere of ice. Come on, little guy. Fernando pulled out a sharp knife hidden inside his black leather arm bracer and looked back at Dudien. Come over. Suddenly, Dudien could see that there were very small white insects inside this almost transparent crystal ball. If you did not look carefully, it was impossible to detect. These are light worms. They can only survive in a cold environment. Fernando smiled and said, if you have the light physique, they will not drink your blood. As soon as he finished speaking, Fernando grabbed Dudien's little hand and moved it to the top of the crystal. On top of the crystal ball there was a small hole, as if it were a container. After a stroke of the blade, Dudien felt pain in his finger. A drop of blood dripped from his finger and fell into the hole, slipping inside the crystal. At this time, the light worms that were lying dormant, sleeping at the bottom of the crystal ball, seemed to wake up as if disturbed from their dreams. As if sniffing for the location of blood, they began to slightly move towards the drop of blood. Fernando's face changed, while the second men frowned upon seeing this scene. Dudien thought of Fernando's words and his heart sank. They saw the light worms quickly climb towards the blood. As soon as they reached the drop of blood, they began absorbing it as if their bodies were sponges. Their small white bodies became tinged with red, but soon after the color quickly dissipated and was restored to white. Impossible. Fernando frowned as he murmured, has it been long since they ate something? Are they hungry? He cut his finger, and dripped blood into the hole. However, the worms did not even glance at it and moved back to the bottom of the crystal ball to curl up. Fernando's face was gloomy. Without a word, he quickly grabbed Dudien's hand and made a cut. Blood fell into the crystal ball, and the worms began to climb to the top to swiftly absorb it. Really, he ain't. Fernando seemed to be somewhat discouraged. He loosened his grip on Dudien's little hand, and also put away his knife. Dudien frowned slightly. By now he probably already knew the reason. His body was immune to radiation more than the average person. So his body's radiation content was lower than ordinary people. These people were looking for hunting partners, but in his case he had been out of the cold storage for less than half a year. His contact with the world was too short, so the body radiation content was low. Another young man looked at Dudien indifferently. It seems your previous family was quite good. When Dudien heard his cold voice his mind became uncomfortable because he understood the meaning behind his words. It seemed these people had already thoroughly investigated Dudien's background. They knew that he was adopted by Jura and Gray. Moreover, they knew that he had not been in Maishan orphanage for long. So as to say, they thought that he was the kind abandoned by an aristocratic or rich family. Only these types of families ate and drank things which were filtered and had low radiation. I did not expect him to be an abandoned rich kid, Fernando sighed with a disappointed face. Dudien was quiet and avoided speaking. But his heart was not discouraged. Once you became a hunter, it was necessary to go to those dangerous areas, although he didn't know what dangers laid outside. But he figured it was best to not take those kinds of risks. The second officer looked at Dudien and spoke in a cold voice, "Little guy. Everything that you saw and heard in here have to be kept confidential. It absolutely must not be exposed, including what you heard about hunters, scavengers, and everything else. Whatever you heard or saw should disappear from your mind. Just forget everything. Do you get me?" These must be the legal restrictions, thought Dudien. He nodded and said, "I will keep my lips sealed." The second officer, upon seeing Dudien be so obedient, turned with a slight chill in his eyes as he looked at Fernando and said, "Fortunately, you did not talk too much nonsense in front of him, or the only option would be left to deal with the little guy." Hearing this, Dudien Zero, who had been calm till then, suddenly felt as if cold water was poured over his head. His life was almost ruined by accident. He now knew for sure that the law couldn't guarantee his life. Even if you observed the law word by word to be safe and sound, there were some powers that could end your life as simply as dusting their sleeves. As if it was their privilege to do so. This situation made him feel a chilling fear, but he also felt a surge of strong anger. This anger was caused by his life being threatened and the rules of this world which could be bent according to powerful's will. Since the law is unreliable, I have to develop my own rules. Aristocratic privilege. Hunter privilege. Someday, I will tear all these into pieces. Dudien's small hands tightly clenched into fists. The two officers did not pay attention to him. Perhaps after they determined that Dudien didn't have the light physique, they lost interest in communicating or even observing him. All of a sudden, coldness emerged from deep within Dudien's eyes. His mind became more mature, more ruthless, and he secretly decided in his heart that he would change his situation and get a hold of an indirect life insurance as soon as possible. Otherwise, if he were to encounter another such scenario, it wasn't certain that he could survive. If he died in such a manner, how was he going to face his parents who granted him a second life? I'm not able to use guns, but gunpowder seems to be. Certain thoughts flashed in his heart. "Hey," Fernando said with regret, "Go, little guy." His attitude was not as warm and friendly as before. "By the way, if you are found leaking information about us to anyone, including your parents, then you can't blame anyone but yourself." Translator note, this is what I'm talking about. By the end of the last chapter everyone would think that Dudien, Dean, would have light physique, and beat the shit out of everything and be the Dark King. It's a usual plot for many Chinese novels, but not in here. This is what I love about the Dark King. Chapter 11. The Dark King, Chapter 11. Back to slums. This chapter was edited by Mr. Martink. Fernando was driving the carriage. They didn't stop at Scavenger's Castle seen by Dudien previously. Instead, they directly went to residential district. Although the carriage stopped at the wall separating commercial and residential district. Dudien had to get off and go back on his own. Do I fail to be a scavenger as well? Dudien had some doubt, so he directly asked. Fernando jumped back to the carriage and impatiently answered, "We have your results, so there is no point in going to check it again. You should wait for few more days and someone will come to report." He flicked the whip and the black carriage sped away. Dudien frowned slightly, turned and walked down the street towards the Jura couple's house. Fortunately, he had previously followed the Avril house carriage to return once, so he knew his way or he would have got lost. He was very tired by the time he returned to 108 Lin Kong Street, it's the Jura and Gray house address. His breath was rough, body was sweating and legs were sore. Although the Jura couple's house was not far from the wall, only 7 or 8 miles, but his body has not recovered fully as he was in frozen storage for a long time. Right now, his physical strength was much weaker than the average child. Jura was looking out the window when she saw Dudien turn the street corner. Immediately her eyes lit up and she quickly went outside followed by Gray. How come nobody sends you off? Why did you come back alone? Gray saw Dudien's unnatural tired condition. So he immediately picked up Dudien's tired and weak little body and quickly returned home. After closing the door, Jura found a cotton towel to clean up Dudien and asked in a concerning tone, "Are you all right? Didn't they like you?" Dudien, seeing their reaction, knew that both Jura and Gray knew that he was taken from the law school. "Did you know? An official came over to inform us that you got the qualification to join the guard." Gray's face was red as he suspiciously asked, "Did you fail the test?" Dudien knew that hunter and scavenger identity should be kept confidential, so he said, "I passed. After a few days someone will come to report. But I do not want to go. Can I refuse this?" If he can choose, he is willing to study the law first. More or less he is clueless about the current world, so he wants to master more things before going outside of the giant wall. Gray was relieved. He laughed and said, "Don't you know that many people crave for a position such as that?" "Oh my. You want to refuse? If you join to be a guard, you do not have to worry about eating and drinking for the rest of your life. It has a great salary, moreover nobody dares to bully you." Jura looked softly at Dudien and said, "Do you still want to study the law?" Dudien nodded earnestly. Jura smiled and said, "If you go over there to train, you will learn law too. Your studies won't be limited to only law but medicine, geology, sewing, and so on. It is a comprehensive school." School. Dudien was confused. Many people could not tell the difference between colleges and schools. In short, the college is specialized one. Such as the law school, sewing college, while school is composed of multiple colleges, and learn something very comprehensive. Nothing to worry about. You will learn the law when you join the guards. Gray patted Dudien's shoulder. There was a wide smile on his face and he continued to encourage Dudien, "I heard there will be a training camp for elimination. So just concentrate on the camp." Auntie. Dudien seized the opportunity to speak to Jura, "I want to borrow some pocket money." Jura was surprised for a moment, then smiled and said, "How much do you want?" "I'll give you." "Don't ever talk about borrowing and repaying, we are a family." Dudien had prepared a reasonable answer, "I want to buy some food and go back to slums to visit the children in the Mission orphanage. I had already planned to borrow money from you, visit the orphanage and come back afterwards." Jura smiled and said, "All right." She took out a pile of green paper notes out of her wallet and counted them. She gave bank notes amounting to 100 coins to Dudien. Since the invention of printing technology 10 years ago, under the management of the Bank of Silva, large amounts of banknotes were issued. In just a few years, they had replaced the coins and circulated to various households in residential and commercial district. Everyone has gradually become accustomed to using paper notes to trade. Nevertheless, people still addressed the amount using the word coins even though the payment was in paper notes. "Thank you." Dudien immediately took bank notes and put them into his pocket. Gray saw this and did not say anything. He told Jura to prepare dinner. Dudien woke up early, ate his breakfast after washing himself and left the house. Although he did not know when the scavengers would send people to pick him up, he knew that he did not have to go to law school for a few days. Sulfur, Dudien vaguely remembered the content of gunpowder. It was a festive when his sister told him how to make firecrackers at home. He was not so much interested in gunpowder, so he could not remember the exact formula in addition to sulfur. Dudien did not go directly to purchase the sulfur. He hired a carriage and went to slums. In the slums, Dudien went directly towards the Mission orphanage. He passed the orphanage and then went over another 4 streets to enter unused streets. Along the way he smelled scent of feces and saw rotten bodies of insects. Not long after he reached a huge garbage dump. The garbage dump of the Silva was located in slums. There was nothing valuable in here to anyone. Therefore, even the poor people would avoid this garbage dump, because all items that were discarded here has long been rotten. Dudien, standing far away, could still smell rancid odor of feces mixed with the smell of urine. Excretion problem of the Silva world was solved by directing it over here. There were 7 or 8 garbage heaps standing like huge mountains. He couldn't see what was behind. He looked around to confirm that no one was around. He came near a rubbish-filled area. Dudian removed the large garbage piece from the area. Later he bent down, took out a piece of cloth and began to clean around a small black hole. It was big enough to accommodate his small and thin frame. It was not a coincidence that he came to this place. Chapter 12. The Dark King, Chapter 12. Supercomputer. Dudian took off his coat. The next moment he found a slightly dry spot on the ground. He used his bare arms to crawl in the cave. Fortunately, there is not steel or glass in these garbage dumps. After all, steel is recyclable, so no poor people will be extravagant enough to throw it away. As for the glass, the poor cannot afford it. The pungent smell was constantly suffocating Dudian. He was at point where he almost throws up everything in his stomach. Time to time he touched wet soft objects. In the dark, he could not see, but many ideas such as lump of feces or rot body of a mouse came to his mind. Even the poorest of the poor would avoid a place such as this one. Dudian clenched his teeth, crawled 7 or 8 meters and finally touched a hard object. It was his frozen storage apparatus. He touched along the edge of the shell, soon found a button and pressed it. Fingerprints are being verified, the mechanical sound echoed in darkness. Click, frozen storage opened. The door of the storage slightly arched the garbage upwards. But more garbage fell into the storage room, filling most of the free space inside. Dudian glanced at the door, where a red-colored figure was present. This was the year. It is this that let him know that he regained consciousness in 300 years. The other reason for him to understand that a full 3 centuries had passed is that the energy tube of the cold storage could only supply for a full 300 years. That time span was the limit. Dudian reached out to the inside and soon touched a raised button. Click sound echoed again. A built-in palm-sized screen popped up, scanning the eyes. The previous mechanical sound talked again as a beam shot onto Dudian's eyes from palm-sized screen. Verification, pass, mechanical voice resounded. The screen ejected a 3-dimensional hologram. There were 2 options, start and exit. Dudian said, start. At the outbreak of the original disaster, he wasn't just frozen. In addition, the storage had a supercomputer in it. It can be said that his supercomputer was the essence of the old civilization. It stored information regarding science, technology as well as social history. These are the informative things and do not account for much memory. Nevertheless, supercomputer included informations regarding social, scientific and technological development of every country, which required at least tens of thousands of gigabytes of storage. Dudian thought of his father's last words, remember, you must rebuild the human civilization. Obviously frozen storage capsule meant to escape the disaster, but his father also took into account the survival of the humanity after the disaster. The outbreak of the global nuclear bomb caused a devastating blow to the human civilization. This supercomputer had all the wisdom of the old world. The basic principles of manufacturing gunpowder and firearms naturally also include within the data. The world has no electricity, but fortunately the remaining energy in the freezer is enough to run the supercomputer even though the body cannot be frozen anymore. But at least it is enough to maintain the basic operation of the cold storage. It was enough to study for few months. Dudian didn't know the exact power voltage, but he estimated that the supercomputer's energy consumption was less than a laptop's. However, Dudian did not have so much time to stay here. There is no time to often come here to watch, as he would cause Jura couple to have suspicions. Enough time to learn how to make gunpowder, generators, and check out the tools of the steam engine era. Dudian, lying on the edge of the cold storage, began to study instantly. He resisted the foul smell of feces and rotten animals. Gradually his body seemed to adapt. His mind was focused on the contents that were displayed by the supercomputer. Sulfur decomposition. Electricity improved steam engine. In this small and dark garbage cave, Dudian concentrated on learning. Unwittingly, Dudian was not completely absorbed by studying. His concept of time was very harsh. At dusk, he rubbed sore eyes and stopped the supercomputer teaching. Not eating and drinking for a whole day, he felt his belly burn. I do know when I will come over here the next time. If an earthquake happens and capsule is uncovered, someone may notice and excavate it. Dudian made the decision that it would be too dangerous to the supercomputer over here. Previously, he did not bring in the Mysian orphanage. Because in the orphanage there was a high chance that it would be exposed by the children. Now though the conditions were different. He lives in residential areas where for residents a small piece of metal is not worth to care for. Even in the scavengers' training camp, it would not cause any attention. Crack, Dudien opened the cover. He used his small nail to eject the small, chip-sized supercomputer. The energy tube is connected to the circuits of the capsule, so it would be very hard to dismantle it out. Dudien looked at this little chip and sighed. Thousands of years of human history and technological inventions are compressed inside this small object. If the rulers of this world know the value of this chip, he did not know how crazy things will become. Duncan carefully put away the chip. He closed the storage's door and hoped that he will see it another time. He began to crawl back to the surface. As soon as he left the garbage heap, he felt as if he was baptized from the hell and made into heaven. In comparison to the air inside, even though everywhere was filled with feces and urination, he felt very fresh after he climbed out. He took a few deep breaths and looked around. He noticed no one around and coat was still on the ground. He picked up the coat and quickly left the dump. Not far away from the garbage dump, the rain water had amassed together into a small lake because of continuous fall of rain. Dudien did bother to control the radiation. He put away his coat and began to clean his arm and chest. As long as he could produce stable power supply, he will be able to find ways to reduce the body radiation from supercomputer. Previously, he found a bit of information in the supercomputer. There was information that documented the method to purify the radiation. But time was limited, so he did not read it. After all, even if he knows now, it is practically useless. Soon his body was slightly cleaner. Sticky things have been wiped out. Especially his left hand, which was stained with feces. He had bursts of nausea. Dudien, he knew his hair and body still exude a strong stench. He had to go home to wash properly, because if he continued to use this rain water he would get sick. Chapter 13. The Dark King, Chapter 13. Gathering. Dudien went back to the neighborhood. He spent 5 copper coins, in the vicinity of the wall, to call a carriage so that he could directly go to the Lin Kong Street. Today was too late, so he did not have enough time to go to buy sulfur and saltpeter. Moreover, after a few days he would have to go to the scavengers' training camp. In regards to confidentiality kept by the organization, everything brought to the camp would be checked closely, so he avoided purchase of those materials. Although in this world, people only knew how to use sulfur for dyes and pesticides. Nevertheless, it also belonged to the low-risk dangerous goods. The Jura couple were apparently anxiously waiting for Dudien to return, and they were noticeably relieved the moment he came back. Because of the strong smell coming of Dudien's body, Gray frowned and began to distance himself. "What is this dirty smell coming off your body?" Dudien coughed and said, "The usual smell of slums." Jura pinched her nose and said, "You should wash." "Wait a moment, I'm going to bring hot water for you," and went to the kitchen. Dudien went into the bathroom. He hid the supercomputer in a crack on the corner off the floor and wall. Soon Jura brought hot water and asked, "You gotta wash properly. Do you want me to help you?" "No," Dudien quickly refused. "Okay. Slowly wash up and clean properly." Jura put the water on the ground, turned to leave. Dudien looked at the small basin of water. He had a slight smile on his face. He missed the showers of the old era. Unfortunately, in this world even water radiation could not be filtered. At least in residential district it was so, which made him to desire to enter the commercial district as soon as possible. 3 days later. A tall carriage sprang to Jura couple's house. A 2 meters high, covered in exquisite armor, strong black horse was pulling the carriage. From the carriage a youth jumped down. He looked at the house number and knocked on the door. The Jura couple and Dudien were having breakfast. They saw the carriage from the window, and all of a sudden they had understood the reason guest had come. Jura immediately opened the door and warmly said, "Come in." The soft-haired youth saw that she seemed to know her purpose. But still he showed the identity card, which was a medal that had a double-cross swords, representing the guard identity. He did not enter the room, said, "No. I'm sorry, but my time is tight. I have to take your child to the commercial district for military training. You must have received the notice, so please make it fast as I'm in a hurry." Jura did not think he was so anxious and busy. "Officer, how long is the child going to be in military training?" The training period is 3 years, he said. During the 3 years, he will be able to come back to home only on holidays. But my suggestion is that he should avoid doing so and study if he wants to complete his studies in 3-year period. Jura's face changed, so hard. What if he can't complete? You can rest assured. Even in case that he is eliminated, he will be referred to small position. The youth said in an indifferent tone. Gray heard their conversation and his heart was relieved. He turned around and saw Dudien slowly dine. He could not help but be stifled, said, Are you going to prepare? Do not let the officer wait for you for long. Come on. Dudien sighed. He hated the most to be interrupted while dining. Looking at Gray's eyes, he could only lay down his rolls, clap his hands, and return to his room. He have already folded the 2 sets of changing clothes and received the linen backpacks. Of course, the most important one was his uniform which he had received beforehand. Dudien brought his backpack to the door. He looked up at the youth, said, Let's go. Jura worriedly asked, Have you taken everything? Clothes, shoes. Everything is in the backpack. Dudien waved, said, Do not worry. Be careful when you go there. Do not fight with other children. Jura added. Dudien's heart warmed. Although the last time when they tried to marry him into Avril House made his heart cold towards them. But seeing Jura to be so sincere and care for him as for her own son changed previous cold feelings. After all, he has been adopted. He was grateful for everything that they had done for him. I will. He answered back, You have to take good care of yourself too. Black Death season is coming up and the temperatures will skyrocket. Ventilate the house a lot or you will catch the diseases. Jura was a perceptual and sentimental person. She didn't know how long it would take to see Dudien again. There were tears flowing down her eyes. Let's go. The youth turned towards carriage. He helped Dudien to put his backpack onto the carriage. Dudien climbed the carriage, looking at Jura and Gray. He waved his hand, there was a hint of dismay in his heart. But soon, this strand of feeling was suppressed in the bottom of his heart. His palm gripped the backpack, ice cold he looked towards the future. His soft heart has become cold and strong. Carriage sped into the business district. Turned a dozen streets and gradually went into a little remote street. Continue to move forward it came to stop in front of a huge wall. The huge iron gate was unlocked and carriage went inside. On each door side there was a massive sword carved. On top of the swords there were 2 words engraved. Loyalty and Guardian. Get off. Youth told to Dudien. Dudien jumped out of the carriage, quietly watching the surrounding environment. Come with me. Youthman glanced at him, released the reins of the horse, not afraid of the carriage to ran away on its own. They walked towards a small door. After passing through there a huge school field appeared in their vision. There were school building around the field. They passed the field onto a remote building. As they were passing through the hall they heard a low cry. The youth, accompanying Dudien, frowned. He opened the wooden door. There were 7 or 8 children at the same age as Dudien. At the moment one of the little girls was holding her knees, squatted on the floor and was crying. Next to her stood few boys with embarrassed faces who did now know what to do. The youth asked in a cold tone, What happened? One of the boys was shocked to see the youth. Minnie said she is homesick. The youth frowned, Is she? He came up to the little girl in front, ordered, I'm going to give you 2 seconds. Stop crying and stand up. The little girl heard his cold words, as if scared timidly stood up. She was trembling and tears were still flowing through her face. Chapter 14. The Dark King, Chapter 14. Orientation. Although I am not your instructor, but I hate to see someone crying in front of me. The youth spoke in a cold tone, Go into your room in the dorm. You can enjoy crying with no effort. Children turned pale, afraid to say anything. Minnie's clenched her hands and clutched her clothes. She bowed her head to fight back her tears. The youth took another glance at the children. He was too lazy to rebuke anything. He came up to the counter, opened a drawer and grabbed string of keys from inside. Come with me, he said and left the hall. Dudien immediately went after him to keep up the youth. Other children picked up their backpacks from the ground and walked after the youth and Dudien. Along the trail through the woods, the crowd come to a low, dilapidated wooden shed. The youth opened the door and said, "This is the place. Pick an empty bed and get ready because tomorrow morning special training will begin." Finished talking, the youth threw the keys towards Dudien and then directly left. Dudien clutched 3 keys in his hand. He looked at wooden shed and slightly frowned. The wooden shed most probably was deliberately built for them. It could not be compared with the gorgeous and unique buildings that were around the place. Even within the standards of slums, it was a relatively poor house to live. Is this how they are going to treat us? Dudien knew, special training was not going to start tomorrow. It began the moment they came to wooden shed. There were 3 rooms inside the wooden barack. All 3 of them were identical. There were 4 beds in each room, mats and some dark stains on the boards. He quickly checked all the beds and picked a relatively clean wood bed. He put his backpack on the bed and waited for the rest to choose their beds so that he can go out to find whisk leaves or large weeds to wipe the bed. At this time, the other children had entered the wooden shed. They were stunned at the sight. Even for boys it was unbearable to live inside the barack. Many squatted down to cry. The kids grew up in residential areas and have not seen such a harsh environment. Instead of wasting his time, Dudien gave the other 2 keys to the children. He went outside to find and gather dried whisk leaves. Later on he came back to wipe the bed. If he had known that this was going to be happening, he thought he should have brought a mattress to cover the bed. The other children watched Dudien busying himself with the cleaning. Having stopped the self-pity, they began to choose beds. One of the children bit his teeth and talked out to rest of them, "Temporarily bear with it, certainly it will get better in the future." Desperate people always need hope to encourage themselves. As time passed they began to compromise with the situation and began to adapt to the current conditions. One of the bigger boys went to Dudien's room. He seemed a bit curious about Dudien. "My name is Mason, what's your name?" "Dudien." "You seem unafraid of dirtiness." The child was direct. "In fact, there is moss-like things over the top of the bed," Dudien said. "What is it?" Mason asked. "It's nothing." Macon, scratching his head, did not know what to say. He saw a few pieces of mildew on the bed board. He thought of Dudien's previous approach. Immediately left the room to the outside to pull some green grass to wipe the bed, but the pieces of mildew on his bed were too much. It didn't matter how hard he tried to rub, the spots were still covered in dark. Dudien looked at him, said, "We have to dry them in sun." Macon surprised for a moment and said, "We can put the bed boards outside for sun to dry them out, so that they do not rot." He called out to other children. They immediately mobilized. Mason looked at Dudien. "Don't you want to dry your bed? I cannot move it alone." "I'll help you," Mason said at once. Dudien, because of his temper, did not ask for help directly. Nevertheless he replied, "Thank you." With Mason's help they took the bed outside the wooden shed. Before long, another youth wearing the officer uniform led a group of children over. The officer looked at the beds in the open space, slightly frowned, but did not say anything. As the previous officer did, he too casually opened a few rooms, so that children picked their own, leaving the key left. The children looked curiously at Dudien, Mason, and others, and then one by one looked at their own bedrooms. "Are these children's dwellings ready?" Dasha came to the window. She was wearing a white thin silk gloves and holding a metal tube. If Dudien would be here, he could recognize at sight that it was an old-fashioned telescope. She took it up to her eyes level and began to watch situation outside the wooden sheds. "Everything is in accordance with your instructions. The housing environment is not unchanged. We will stop supplying hot water soon. Tobu respectfully, I believe they will soon adapt to the pain and hardship. This time, I am confident that we will produce more than 100 scavengers." Dasha nodded slightly. Suddenly she saw a group of children carrying the beds from the wooden sheds into the open space. She was confused for a moment as she didn't expect them to act so. After a while, she put away the binoculars and said, "These children, you have to discipline them good. The number of passing children is declining each year. We have to improve teaching methods and tactics in order to maintain stable number of scavengers. In addition, do not forget that in case their mental state is not up to par, then eliminate them instantly." Tobu bowed his head, "Yes. In the evening, the children worked together to help each other to move the beds back to their respective rooms. Mason pulled out a bedding from his backpack and lay it on the mattress. Some of the children looked at him in envy. He laughed back and comfortably lied down in a proud manner because of his foresight. Dudien changed his clothes and lied down too. He closed his eyes to review the knowledge he got from Super Chip. Unknowingly, he fell asleep. He woke up at 5 a.m. next morning because of harsh strange sounds coming from outside. Dudien and other children got up and came together to look at source of strange voice. They saw a meter-tall bird creature with a crooked neck. It was emitting a very sharp sound, almost breaking their eardrums. Chapter 15. The Dark King, Chapter 15. As long as you stay alive. To begin with, it was an unbearable place to live, so the children were not adapted to the new environment. They barely had any sleep yet. At the moment to hear an ear-piercing sound such as this one, it felt as if lots of needles were stuck to their brains. One after another they got out of the room. The sky was still dark, and the nighttime temperature was cold. Most of them could not help but shiver because of the having gone out in pyjamas. At this time, that strange bird called out 3 more times and stopped. Some children wanted to go back to sleep. In vain, though. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to be ready to stand in front of me. A brown-haired brawny person of 2-meter height cried out loud. Many children were confused first, but they remember about the special training. Dudien's biological clock was destroyed, cannot help but have some headaches. He restrained his emotions, turned back to the room to wear a coat but gave up. There was cold water near the door which he used to wash his face and later come out of the wooden shed towards the brawny man. Only 2.5 minutes had passed. Other children gave up on washing themselves but instead put on clothes to go out. They wanted to give a good impression to the instructor, so they did their best to be as early as possible. But there were others who even in 3 minutes still had not changed, especially girls, holding a lot of luggage full of clothes, hesitating what to wear today look good. Instructor did not urge anyone but quietly waited. Time went by. About 5 minutes later everyone was out near the instructor. Since today is the first day, I set up a special alarm for you to get up from sleep. But from tomorrow I hope that when I come over here I can see all of you ready and set. Yes, answered several bold boys loudly. The brown-haired man nodded slightly. Well, today you are 5 minutes late. So everyone will come go to school field and run 5 laps. Many children's face slightly changed. They had seen the huge school field. Let alone 5 laps, even a full circle was going to exhaust them. Teacher, why is everyone? We came over within 3 minutes. Even if it is because of being late. Some were late for 2 minutes, why is it 5 minutes? Several boys could not help but speak out their thoughts. Instruct spoke in an indifferent tone. First of all, even if you all were ready in 3 minutes' time, you would still run 3 times around the field. Secondly, you are a group. A collective. If one of you is left behind, the rest of you gotta bear the consequences. Teacher, I am not satisfied. There will always be people dragging their feet. I refuse to follow such a ridiculous idea. A few boys suddenly spoke out in anger. Instructor licked his lips and said in a rhetorical manner, not satisfied, are you? Without waiting for a response, instructor kicked the boy who talked first in stomach. The kick was so hard that the kid was pushed backwards, hit few other children and fall down in pain. You do not agree. Instructor kicked another dissatisfied boy in the same way as the first one. Unfortunate for other, he didn't stop but continued to kick another 3 or 4 boys. As soon as he was finished with kicking them, instructor turned to speak, here you don't ask anything. You only obey the orders. Anyone who refuses to act but will be hit by me. I may even kill you. Believe me, nobody will care. There was a trace of indifference in his face as he sneered and continued, the previous session I killed one. Unfortunately you didn't see it. It's better to kill the garbages instead of wasting time and resources to nurture them. All the children who heard the vicious words coming out of instructor's mouth were scared and turned pale. Some of the girls had their legs trembling because of the fear. Tears poured out, but not dare to cry. Instructor gazed at them before saying, if you haven't finished in 10 minutes, then no breakfast. Then suddenly smiled, this cannot follow the collective idea. Those who don't finish, those are the ones who won't eat. I do not want to let individual garbage pull down the level of the whole. Hearing this, a lot of sturdy children suddenly felt relieved. Dudian sighed, almost crying in his heart. He knew that he certainly won't finish the run on time. Soon, the instructor brought all of them into the school field to begin to run. However, the school field was too big. Even the children with the best physiques failed to finish in 10 minutes. Some were late for a minute, some for 2 minutes, and some for 4 or 5 minutes. In short, everyone lost the opportunity for breakfast. Some frail girls finished 5 laps 20 minutes over the time limit. But Dudien's results stunned everyone. He had spent 30 whole minutes over the time limit to finish the run. He won the nickname, indisputable, from other children. Mason and the other 2 boys who lived in the same room as Dudien pulled away from him as if he was a total stranger to them. Although Dudien was relatively calm, but to see all the strange eyes cast at him, he couldn't but blush a bit because of shame. He knew that having slept in a frozen storage capsule for 300 years had slowly weakened his body. It would take many months to recover. He got tired from walking, let alone to run for 5 laps. Instructor looked at Dudien and did not say anything. Everyone gather. Instructor ordered as soon as Dudien finished. This time instructor's order was not left deaf by anyone. Soon everyone was arranged in neat rows. A self-introduction first. My name is Tobu. Brown hair instructor continued in an indifferent tone, the next 3 years I'll be responsible for training you. I have only one rule, which is to obey any of my orders. Of course, I do not want to teach people who are a group of puppets that listen to orders only. Any question, except the ones towards my orders, is welcome. Teacher, what are we here to learn? Only exercises. A boy immediately asked with disturbance on his face. Tobu indifferently smiled, said, as long as you learn to stay alive in here, you can graduate. Alive. All children surprised a moment. Dudien's mind turned cold. He knew that graduating from scavenger camp was going to be hard, as the situation outside the giant wall was very vulnerable to a normal human being. Chapter 16. The Dark King, Chapter 16. The Stupid Questions. In here, I will teach you how to survive in hard conditions and environments. Tobu indifferent spoke, today is your first day. I'll give you rewards if you can answer few simple questions. Eyes of the children were focused on him. The first question. Tobu calmly said, how can we stay alive? All of them could not help be surprised for a moment. How to stay alive? They never thought about it. From small age they were protected by their parents. Afterwards everyone planned to choose their favorite college during the admonitions. Later on work to earn and continue their lives. Make money. A girl immediately raised her hands to answer. Other children suddenly sighed, yes Of course you have to learn to make money if you want to live. Such a simple answer, and they let a girl to take the advantage of situation to answer first. Tobu still had an indifferent and unimpressed look. He spat out a word, wrong. Work. Another boy tentatively spoke out. Tobu glanced at him, wrong. By the way, everyone only has one chance to answer. All the children looked at each other. It's not making money, and it's not working too. Teacher, you just live. Is there any situation to live? A white-skinned tender girl frowned. Tobu looked at her, there is no situation to live. Hearing this, all children cannot help but looked at each other. Dudien also frowned slightly. His brain fluttered up to his observations. The answer should not be tricky. Actually, the answer should be an easy one. To eat. He raised his hand. As soon as the words came out from Dudien's mouth, the children turned over to him with stunned expressions. It did not take long before Pucci sounds were echoed. All of them were laughing out loud. To eat. Is there more idiotic answer than this? Right, replied Tobu indifferently. Children were stunned and perplexed. Looking at all the children's stunned expression, Toby cold smile, the simple answer. I was worried that no one would answer correctly, and I will not give out a reward. In your minds, in addition to lack of water, what is more fatal to human life? All the children had ugly looks. Some were not convinced. But having the experience of Tobu's previous atrocities, no one would dare to question. Dudien was relieved. Like other children, he thought that the answer couldn't be so simple, but nevertheless his bet won him a reward. The second question. Tobu continued, "How can we eat food?" All children were confused. What kind of stupid question is this? Make money. A voice quickly echoed. It was the little girl who was first to answer the first question. This time she chose to reply with the same answer. Other children suddenly want to stomp. Damn, the first one they missed, and this chance was robbed by the girl. Wrong. Tobu replied. The little girl was surprised for a moment. How can you eat food with buying it? Other children are also startled. But soon they quickly raised their hands to answer so that they not lose the chance for getting the reward. I know. It is by working. I know. My mother. Use the upper and lower teeth to chew. The last boy thought of the simple answer to the previous Dudien's contrarian thought, and immediately said tentatively. Tobu could not help but look at him, his face showing a trace of ridicule. Is there anyone who uses their ass to chew the food? The boy's face was embarrassed, blushing like blood. All wrong, a bunch of rubbish, said Tobu. Dudien did not expect to be last one to answer again, as everyone had wrong answers. He was lost in thought, thinking back to previous thinking way. According to that kind of logic, the first step to stay alive is to eat. So the first step to eat is find food. Dudien once again raised his hand. Tobu lightly looked at him, said, right. All the children were again dumbfounded. It's that simple. It's that simple. Here's the last question. Tobu indifferent, how to find food. All the children cannot help but look to the Dudien. Dudien saw the eccentric eyes of children focused on him. His heart was frustrated. This time he really did not know the answer. As they saw Dudien being silent, the children began to think their brains out. One after another raised their hands to answer. The answers were similar to the previous one. Especially the make money little girl. The third answer was still to make money. It seemed that she won't stray from her thinking style. Ultimately all the answers were wrong. Soon, after a round of answers, almost no one answered correctly. Tobu looked around and said, so no one knows. Several children standing near Dudien cannot help but look to him, as he was the only one who has not answered. Dudien felt their eyes, and even felt Tobu to look at him. It seems Tobu waited for him to answer. But this time he really does not know, cannot think of an answer, as all the other children have set out possible answers that he could think of. It seems that there is no one to answer. Tobu saw Dudien did not answer, so he no longer waited and explained, the first step to find food is to learn to identify food. Today's first lesson is to teach you to know which food to eat. Dudien understood the purpose of the 3 questions. Through the conversation with Mason yesterday, he confirmed his guess. No one knew about scavenger special training. All of them thought that it was just a guard training camp. Dudien knew from his previous conversation with Fernando that scavengers had to go outside the giant wall into the wilderness to look for resources. Their own resources to eat and drink would be limited while going out, so they had to learn how to survive in the wilderness outside the giant wall. Understanding the food was their first class. Teacher, what is my reward? Dudien saw Toba has not yet announced, cannot help but raise his hand to ask. Tobo glanced at him and said, every answer is to be rewarded with a single breakfast. Congratulations, you get 2 breakfast rewards. Today we have passed the breakfast time, so you can only wait until tomorrow to use it. A breakfast. Dudien some stun. He did not know yet, but in a short period of half a month after the special training, he profoundly realized that how valuable those 2 breakfasts were. Now, the end of the rest, run 10 laps around school field. Tobu suddenly shouted. All children cannot help but startled, this has just finished but also have to run. Time is half an hour. For every 5 late minutes, plus a lap. Tobu declared the rules indifferently. Teacher, do not Some of the children could not help crying, but soon took the lead to run at full speed because Tobu did not seem to be joking about extra laps. Dudien's mouth slightly convulsed. This rule was simply ruthless to him. But he had a faint guess, Tobu did this exercise to increase their endurance. According to Tobu's argumentation and login, since it is learning how to survive, then they should not exercise power and strength but speed and durability. Part 1 of the series ends here. Thank you for watching and listening. If you find it interesting, please give us a like, a comment and a subscription so that we have the motivation to make the next videos.